Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Imagine a galaxy where humanity's potential was not devoured by fear, war, and dogma. Imagine a civilization that looked into the abyss of chaos and did not become a monster in return. The Interex were not mythical, they were real, they were human, and they were annihilated by the very empire that claimed to unify mankind. Their destruction wasn't just a battle lost, it was an idea extinguished, a vision of what we could have been, crushed beneath the weight of an Imperium that demands obedience over understanding and silence over song. In their story lies a haunting reflection of our own galaxy's dark trajectory. We don't just mourn the Interex for their loss. We mourn them for what they revealed, that there was another path, that humanity might have transcended war, that knowledge, culture, and coexistence could have triumphed over steel and fire. But instead, we buried it under rubble and propaganda, and the stars grew darker for it. Long before the Imperium's steel tide washed across the stars, the ancestors of the Interex departed Terra during the height of the age of technology. This era, shrouded in myth and ruins, was a time when mankind was not just surviving, but thriving. Terraforming worlds, building artificial intelligences, mastering faster-than-light travel with confidence, humanity spread outward in 1,000 directions, fracturing into culturally distinct groups with startling speed. The Interex, it seems, were one such splinter, drifting away from the mainstream of imperial destiny, left to evolve alone in the deep reaches of the galaxy. And evolve they did, but not in the usual sense of technological stagnation or collapse. While much of humanity succumbed to war with their own machines, the dreaded Men of Iron, or fell into darkness during the Age of Strife, the Interex took another route. Rather than destroy their past or recoil in fear from their technological children, they redefined the rules of cohabitation. They came to reject the kind of mindless AI that doomed other worlds, yet developed forms of controlled limited intelligence that did not threaten their existence. Somewhere between the soulless Men of Iron and the abacus of a tech priest, the Interex found balance. They were not anti-technology. They were cautious, philosophical, restrained. And that restraint became their greatest strength, and later, their death sentence. It is likely that during the long night, when warp storms cut off entire sectors and humanity turned feral in many regions, the Interex endured by sheer virtue of this harmony. They were not expansionist, not domineering, not reckless. They did not call attention to themselves. Their isolation became their salvation. Worlds that did not descend into barbarism were rare. Worlds that maintained any form of stable human governance were even rarer. But to go beyond survival and into refinement, to grow more moral, more peaceful, more complex, while the rest of the galaxy burned, that is a miracle in itself. There are signs that the Interex preserved vast tracts of pre-imperial knowledge, understanding of the warp, of chaos, and of forbidden Xenos entities, that the Imperium can only dream of rediscovering. They didn't fear chaos in ignorance, the way most humans do. They understood it. They treated it as an existential force, not a religious blasphemy. They knew the warp could not be bargained with, but also saw that turning one's own civilization into a fortress of superstition was no answer either. This puts them miles ahead of even the Emperor himself, whose Imperium would come to worship him as a god despite his intentions. The Interex managed to navigate the warp without falling into it. That alone places them on a pedestal few have ever reached. And what of their early interactions with other species? The Kinebrak, with whom the Interex coexisted, did not enslave or threaten them. They were not beasts to be culled, nor oppressors to be fought. Instead, they became allies, trade partners, perhaps even friends. In an age when human fear of the alien justified slaughter on an industrial scale, the Interex dared to see beyond fear. This decision, controversial as it was by imperial standards, suggests that their ethical framework had evolved far past mere tribalism. They did not view difference as danger. They viewed uncontrolled aggression, whether human or Xenos, as the true threat. This origin story is more than historical footnote. It challenges the foundational myths of the Imperium. It shows that peace is not only possible but achievable, that knowledge does not always lead to damnation, and that strength does not need to be expressed through extermination. The Interex are the counter-melody to the Imperium's constant war drum, a reminder that humanity once had options. that the darkness we now live in was not inevitable, that we chose it. And so, in tracing their rise from the age of technology, we glimpse a timeline not ruled by Astartes and Titans, but by wisdom, restraint, and clarity. The Interex didn't merely survive the collapse of human civilization, they transcended it, and for that crime, they were marked for death. The Interex were not simply another lost colony of humanity. They were something entirely different. Something wholly alien in their beauty and terrifying in their divergence from the Imperium's path. Their society, at its heart, was a living argument against everything the Imperium held sacred. Where the Imperium preached order through force, the Interex practiced harmony through understanding. Where the Imperium glorified sacrifice, they celebrated preservation. And where the Imperium demanded uniformity, they embraced multiplicity. Everything about their civilization breathed intention. Their cities were not sprawling utilitarian hives, but structured marvels of design, woven into the landscapes they inhabited with such subtlety that one could mistake them for natural wonders. Music wasn't just art, it was language. They communicated through harmonic tones that reflected emotional nuance, mathematical precision, and historical context, all at once. Imagine a people whose very conversations were symphonies, whose archives were concert halls, whose law was sung rather than written. Such a people weren't simply advanced, they were elevated. Governance among the Interex was administered not through hereditary aristocracy or totalitarian command, but through an intricate, consensus-driven system that involved both human and non-human voices. Councils, possibly composed of representatives from both human and Kinnebrok populations, deliberated with patience and foresight. They were not swift, but they were stable. Not reactive, but deeply proactive. There is no record of widespread internal dissent or rebellion. No need for a brutal enforcement arm. No arbites, no inquisition. Their social order didn't rest on fear, it rested on agreement. And in the 41st millennium, such a notion seems like fantasy. Even their approach to conflict was measured. The Interex maintained a military force known as the Lex Talionis, not a standing army driven by conquest, but a guardian order. Its very name, Law of Retaliation, speaks volumes about their ethos. Force was not to be used to dominate, only to protect. Their weapons, elegant and devastating, incorporated crystalline elements and harmonic technology, likely derived from Kinnebrok cooperation. It is believed they had technology capable of disrupting warp-based anomalies and possessed a refined understanding of chaos as a metaphysical threat, not a religious taboo. Unlike the Imperium's blind hatred or the Mechanicum's dogmatic hoarding, the Interex understood the warp and guarded against it with intellect rather than flame. There's something almost painful in how clearly the Interex reflect what the Imperium once pretended to be. During the Great Crusade, the Emperor spoke of enlightenment, unity, and knowledge. But in truth, the Imperium became a machine for obliteration. By contrast, the Interex were what the Emperor's dream could have looked like had it not been perverted by necessity, ego, and bloodlust. Their rejection of chaos was not built on burning witches or torching libraries. It was philosophical, systemic, ingrained in every layer of their society. Chaos was seen as an aberration not to be feared but understood and denied at the level of cultural immunity. Their aesthetic choices were not trivial, they revealed the soul of the civilization. The Interex used harmonic crystals in both architecture and warfare, suggesting a society where function and beauty were not opposites but allies. Their armor and structures echoed natural forms. There was grace in everything, even death. A civilization that turns even battle into art is either truly insane or truly wise. The Interex, clearly, were the latter. There's a tragedy in knowing this society existed, however briefly, beside the juggernaut of the Great Crusade. Because in that brief window, the galaxy glimpsed a path not walked. A path where humanity could have lived alongside its differences rather than exterminated them. A path where wisdom was valued over zeal. And it wasn't theory, it was real. The Interex were living proof. They showed that it could be done. But in a galaxy that prizes dominance over dialogue, their virtues became their vulnerabilities. Their unwillingness to embrace preemptive violence, their openness to alliance, their measured pace, all of it became weaknesses in the eyes of the Imperium. They were seen not as peers, but as anomalies to be corrected. The great machine of unification does not tolerate variation. And so, in the name of unity, a society that had already mastered coexistence was erased. The Interex weren't lost to the warp or conquered by aliens. They were murdered by their kin. And what makes that so bitter is the knowledge that they were better than us, smarter, kinder, stronger in the ways that mattered. And we destroyed them because we couldn't bear the mirror they held up to our faces. Among the many wonders that made the Interex a civilization apart, one stands out as the most incomprehensible to the Imperium: their relationship with Xenos. It wasn't simply tolerance, nor was it naive idealism. The Interex lived alongside the Kinnebrok, a Xeno species whose very existence challenged the rigid doctrines of the Great Crusade. This wasn't an uneasy alliance of necessity. It was a bond rooted in mutual benefit, trust, and perhaps friendship. And that was heresy of the highest order. To the Imperium, Xenos are an abomination. They are the other, the antithesis of humanity's divine right to dominate the stars. From the moment the Emperor launched his crusade, the policy was clear. Alien life must be exterminated, subjugated, or ignored, never accepted. This wasn't merely a military strategy. It was a cultural foundation, a justification for endless war. But the Interex had no need for such ideological armor. They had transcended that primal fear. They had already fought their battles with chaos and come to realize that the greatest threat did not lie in strange faces, but in uncontrolled emotion, blind aggression, and unchecked power. The Kinnebrok themselves are a mystery. Very little survives about them in the historical record, likely because the Imperium not only annihilated them, but also erased all trace of their contributions. What we do know suggests they were humanoid, highly intelligent, and wielders of advanced technology with psychic resonance. They may have been partially warp-attuned, though not necessarily corrupted by it. In many ways, they may have resembled the Eldar in terms of elegance and psychic potential, but without the arrogance and apathy that so often defines that dying race. What is astonishing is that the Interex not only tolerated the Kinnebrok, they integrated them. Their cities contained Kinnebrok architectural styles. Their armories displayed weapons designed by both races. Their myths and philosophical treatises included non-human perspectives. This was not a human empire with alien auxiliaries. It was a shared civilization, a cultural hybrid, a deliberate, stable fusion between human resilience and alien intellect. And the most damning evidence of this integration? The fact that the Interex had seemingly controlled or neutralized the influence of the warp through this relationship. Not with sorcery, not with suppression, but with understanding. The Interex maintained a museum of alien and chaos artifacts, the Hall of Devices. This place, often misunderstood by Imperial accounts, was not a vault of blasphemous temptation. It was a fortress of knowledge. Every artifact was studied, catalogued, contained. There was no worship, there was no corruption, there was only vigilance. Where the Imperium would have burned such things in holy fire or hidden them beneath endless vaults of secrecy, the Interex kept them in plain view, as a warning and a lesson. And it worked. They had survived, they had endured, they had grown. This alliance with the Kinnebrok must have been born from a deep and ancient process. It would not have been quick. There must have been decades, even centuries, of careful diplomacy, shared learning, cautious experimentation. It is impossible to imagine the depth of trust required for such a bond in a galaxy so poisoned by betrayal. And yet they achieved it. Against all odds, they reached out across the great species divide and found not a monster, but a mirror. The Kinnebrok were not perfect, but neither were the humans of the Interex. Together, they became something more than the sum of their parts. To the Imperium, this was not only incomprehensible, it was threatening. An integrated human Xenos civilization defied everything the Emperor had built. It could not be allowed to exist, because its existence alone proved that the Imperium's ideology was a choice, not a necessity. And in that choice, it was revealed as monstrous. The Interex and Kinnebrok showed that another way was possible. A galaxy where peace could be enforced through wisdom, not genocide. Where power could be shared, not hoarded. Where difference did not demand extermination. But such a world could never coexist with the Imperium of man. Not because it was weaker, but because it was stronger in ways the Imperium could never match. It didn't need the Astartes, the Inquisition, the Ecclesiarchy. It had balance, it had self-awareness, and for that, it was marked for death. In the end, the Kinnebrok were slaughtered alongside their human allies. Their legacy, if any survives, is buried beneath lies and rubble. Their culture, their wisdom, their potential, all lost in the fires of misunderstanding and fear. The Imperium does not remember them, but we must, because in the Interex Kinnebrok alliance, we are given a glimpse of the future humanity could have had. A future not drowned in blood, but illuminated by cooperation. That light was extinguished. But it burned once, and that flame still haunts the darkness. If there is one haunting detail that encapsulates the Interex, one small shard of their soul still glinting in the ruins, it is this: they wrote in music. Their language, both written and spoken, was built on harmonic frequencies, tonal shifts, and layered melodies that conveyed emotion, logic, and memory all at once. The Interex were not just intelligent, they were artists of thought itself. Their communication transcended static symbols and cold syntax. Every message was a composition, every sentence a symphony. And in this single innovation, they revealed a culture that saw no division between knowledge and beauty. This wasn't aesthetic indulgence, it was philosophy. The Interex believed that how something was communicated mattered as much as what was said. Words spoken in dissonance carried unease. Ideas sung in harmony soothed and persuaded. They believed meaning was not absolute, but relational, shaped by context, tone, and emotion. Imagine what that does to a society's politics, its science, its morality. Imagine diplomacy conducted through choirs instead of declarations. Laws inscribed in melodies that changed with the mood of the people. Justice tempered not only by reason, but by song. Even their artificial constructs, likely AI or advanced computational systems, were designed to interpret and produce music, not binary. This wasn't a utopia of glass spires and drones. It was a civilization shaped by resonance, literally tuned to itself. Their weaponry, too, was crafted with the same dual ethos of beauty and function. Blade edges inlaid with resonance crystals, armor etched in harmonic patterns, tools of war that doubled as instruments. Not merely for aesthetic reasons, but possibly as a form of technological integration. Their weapons may have used sound or frequency manipulation as part of their design. The very act of combat might have been orchestrated, measured, controlled, even ritualized. Where the Imperium revels in brutal efficiency, the Interex seem to have practiced a kind of martial art steeped in precision and discipline, perhaps not unlike the Eldar. But this was human, this was ours. And we let it be erased. Their archives, entire libraries encoded in music, must have been staggering. Not just databanks, but harmonic vaults. A single note might unlock a history. A chord could describe a mathematical theorem. There is no evidence they burned books, purged records, or enforced historical censorship. Instead, they preserved everything, embedding knowledge into their very culture in a way no censor could easily destroy. One can only imagine what secrets died when their cities fell. What ancient memories were silenced when the Hall of Devices was lost. The Imperium would see such methods as inefficient. But they weren't meant for speed. They were meant for truth. But this beauty came with fragility. Because when the Imperium arrived, it didn't hear the music. It didn't listen. It saw strange weapons, alien artifacts, Xenos alliances, and labeled it all heresy. It is heartbreaking to realize that so much of the Interex's story is about communication that failed. Misunderstanding born not of malice, but of incompatibility. The Imperium speaks in order, in commands, in absolutes. The Interex spoke in nuance, in shifting tones, in carefully calibrated emotional resonance. When the Luna Wolves entered their halls, they saw trophies and threats, but the Interex were trying to speak, trying to share. Their very walls were singing, and no one understood. This is not simply a story of war. It is a story of missed meaning, of cultural blindness. The Imperium did not just kill the Interex, it silenced them. It crushed the music beneath the boots of soldiers who never knew what it was they were destroying. And that is the cruelest part of all. That a society which encoded wisdom and harmony, which merged art with science, morality with aesthetics, was struck down before its language could even be translated. No records of Interex speech survive, no music, no archives. It is likely the Imperium either destroyed or deliberately suppressed anything that could humanize them. The records we do have come from second-hand Imperial accounts, stained with bias, confusion, and omission. What survives are not facts, but echoes. And perhaps that is fitting. The Interex were a civilization of echoes, resonances that live beyond the immediate. And though their songs have been silenced, the memory of their harmony remains. They were not utopian. They were not perfect. But they tried to make something beautiful in a galaxy that crushes beauty as weakness. They succeeded. And for that success, they were murdered. We cannot recover their songs, but we can remember that they sang. The encounter between the Imperium and the Interex should have been a moment of triumph, a cosmic miracle. After so many ruined worlds, so many feral human populations lost to ignorance and fear, here at last was a civilization not only intact but flourishing. And more than that, they had rejected chaos without needing the imperial creed. They had preserved technological sophistication without succumbing to the cold, mechanized zealotry of Mars. When the Luna Wolves made contact, what they found was not a rival but a revelation. And for one brief, shining moment, it seemed like peace was possible. Initial diplomacy between the Interex and the Luna Wolves was cautious but not hostile. The Interex welcomed the emissaries of the Great Crusade, even hosted them in their cities. They showed them the Hall of Devices, their repository of dangerous artifacts, including chaos-tainted items they had sealed away for study and containment. They offered transparency, not defiance. And in return, the Luna Wolves gave confusion. Admiration, yes, but laced with discomfort. For all their strength and loyalty, they were not trained for what they found. They were warriors, not philosophers. And what they saw in the Interex was not just unfamiliar. It was threatening to everything they had been taught to believe. There was an effort, though. Horus himself, still the beloved Warmaster at the time, seemed to sense the significance of this moment. He extended genuine diplomatic intent. He saw, perhaps more than his brothers would have, the value of what the Interex offered. He was charmed, even intrigued. Had things gone slightly differently, the Imperium might have added the Interex as allies rather than enemies. But the truth is, this fragile relationship was already doomed, not by incompatibility, but by sabotage. Enter Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers. A traitor already serving the ruinous powers, Erebus had no intention of letting peace blossom. He knew the Interex were not just an obstacle, they were a threat to the chaos narrative. If a human civilization could reject chaos without worshipping the Emperor, then the lie of chaos's inevitability was exposed. The Interex represented a third path, neither imperial domination nor demonic seduction. And that path had to be severed. In a calculated move, Erebus stole a weapon from the Hall of Devices, a blade tainted by chaos, sealed away by the Interex as too dangerous to destroy. It wasn't just theft, it was a framing. The Interex believed the Imperium had violated their trust, stolen a cursed artifact, and perhaps intended to unleash its power. Their caution turned to fury, and the slow, careful diplomacy that might have saved two civilizations collapsed in an instant. The tragedy here is layered. On the surface, it's a diplomatic failure turned to violence. But beneath, it's the story of one man's manipulation against a backdrop of mutual ignorance. Erebus knew the Interex's caution. He exploited their ethics against them. He knew the Imperium's pride. He weaponized it. And perhaps most cruelly, he exploited the warp taint of the stolen artifact to drive paranoia to its peak. The Interex, despite their rational culture, reacted as they had to, decisively, protectively, and with the full force of their military doctrine. What followed was not a misunderstanding, it was a calculated fall into blood. The Luna Wolves, perceiving betrayal, responded with violence. The Interex, interpreting theft and aggression as proof of imperial duplicity, retaliated with righteous fury. No matter how the battle unfolded, the moment was already lost. And Erebus, the orchestrator of it all, faded into the background. That of his mission complete. This moment, this breach of peace, is one of the most painful turning points in Warhammer's lore. It is the moment where possibility was murdered, where a bond between civilizations, however uneasy, was twisted into a pretext for war. And all it took was one poisoned hand in the shadows. There's a cruelty in how preventable it all was. If only the Imperium had listened more carefully. If only the Interex had trusted just a little longer. If only Horus had suspected the traitor among them. But these if-onlys echo across the galaxy. They are the footnotes of countless genocides in the name of progress. The Interex were not the first to be lost this way, but they were perhaps the most noble. Their fall was not a consequence of their weakness, but of their strength. Their civilization was too enlightened to comprehend the depths of treachery Erebus represented. And the Imperium, for all its power, was too blind to realize that what had been offered was not resistance, but redemption. There was no declaration of war, no grand clash of titanic armies on a field of glory. The fall of the Interex came quickly, suddenly, and with the sickening finality of a throat slit in the dark. What began as a misunderstanding, poisoned by Erebus's treachery, erupted into swift, brutal combat between two forces that, had they stood side by side, might have changed the course of human history. Instead, they tore each other apart under stars that had watched mankind rise and fall 1,000 times before. The Luna Wolves were taken off guard at first. Horus had hoped for peace, even if his legion had remained on edge in the face of the Interex's strange customs and inscrutable technology. But when the Interex struck, it was with purpose. Their retaliation was not driven by vengeance or bloodlust. It was an act of containment. They believed they were confronting a rogue faction, possibly even a chaos-corrupted force that had betrayed trust and stolen a warp-tainted artifact. Their military doctrine did not allow for hesitation. The Lex Talionis, their warriors, moved to neutralize what they saw as an existential threat. The battle was precise. The Interex were not berserkers. Their tactics were clean, controlled, devastating. Energy weapons of unknown design laced through the air in harmonic arcs, disabling and destroying in equal measure. Their soldiers moved like dancers, disciplined, focused, elegant. The Luna Wolves, by contrast, responded with the full weight of the Astartes war machine. Once blood was drawn, the hope for de-escalation collapsed. Orders were given. Vengeance was demanded. And then came fire. What followed was not war. It was massacre. The Imperium's doctrine of exterminatus doesn't always require a virus bomb or an orbital barrage. Sometimes it arrives through the raw fury of legionary shock assault. The Luna Wolves descended into the Interex's cities like an unleashed storm, their bolters reducing crystalline architecture to rubble, their power armor trampling on symphonies etched into stone. The Interex, for all their brilliance, had never faced such fury. Their weapons could maim, disable, even kill, yes, but they were not designed for the kind of war the Imperium waged, not for relentless slaughter. The worst part, the most tragic part, was that even in their final moments, the Interex tried to understand. Reports suggest that as their defenses crumbled, some of their leaders attempted to negotiate. Not surrender, but explanation, clarification, pleas to end the madness. But by then, the fire had consumed all reason. Horus himself, heartbroken and enraged, led the final push. Whether he did so out of revenge, confusion, or simply a desire to end the shame of the encounter, no one can say for certain. What is known is that he gave the order, and with that, the Interex ceased to exist. There were no survivors. The Kinnebrock too were wiped out, slain not for rebellion, but for existing. Their cities were burned, their libraries shattered, their art silenced. No prisoners, no salvaged technology, no preserved songs, only ash echoing with what might have been. The Hall of Devices was destroyed. Every artifact within, some of them predating the Imperium, perhaps even predating mankind's understanding of the warp, was either lost or claimed by Erebus, vanishing into the dark web of chaos. It is tempting to look away here, to say that this was one of many such incidents during the Crusade, that it was inevitable, that it was necessary, but that would be a lie. The Interex were not hostile. They were not fanatics. They were not threats to human survival. They were a civilization of peace, of culture, of strength held in reserve. Their death was not collateral damage. It was a moral failure. A massacre in every sense of the word. The Imperium did not just destroy a people. It destroyed a philosophy. It proved that diplomacy, knowledge, and coexistence had no place in the new galactic order. It sent a message that no alternative to the imperial truth would be tolerated, even one that had already succeeded in keeping chaos at bay. The Interex died not because they were weak, but because they stood as living proof that the Imperium's path was not the only one. And that, more than anything, was unforgivable. In the end, the stars above the Interex homeworld watched as their cities turned to embers. The music stopped, the harmony shattered, And somewhere, Erebus smiled. The great lie of chaos is that destruction is inevitable. The greater lie of the Imperium is that destruction is justified. In the ashes of the Interex, both lies found fertile ground, and the galaxy we know today, dark, bitter, and howling with war, is built on that foundation. What if Horus had joined the Interex? Not in passing admiration, not as a diplomatic guest, but fully, philosophically, politically, even spiritually. What if, in that fragile moment of awe beneath the vaulted harmonies of Interex architecture, he had seen not a rival civilization, but a salvation? What if he had paused long enough, thought deeply enough, to realize that the Interex had achieved what the Emperor could only dream of? A stable, enlightened, morally grounded human society, free from chaos, free from superstition, and free from the tyranny of absolute rule. It's not as impossible as it sounds. Horus, for all his pride and ambition, was also a being of vast intelligence and emotional depth. In the early days of the Great Crusade, he believed in the dream of unity, but he also saw the cost. He saw worlds shattered, cultures obliterated, history rewritten with fire. The meeting with the Interex shook him. There was something there that resonated, something he respected. And for a moment, a very brief moment, the idea must have flickered. What if this is what the Emperor actually wanted? What if the Interex are not heretics but the goal? Had Horus made that choice, had he declared allegiance not to the Imperium, but to this alternative vision of humanity, the entire galaxy would have changed. He would have become a second emperor, not in might, but in moral authority. A Primarch leading not through conquest, but through coalition. The Interex would have gained not just an ally, but a protector, a bridge to the fractured remnants of human civilization. And through Horus, other legions might have followed. Think of the Luna Wolves, so loyal to their warmaster, so adaptable, so curious compared to the more zealous legions. With time, with exposure, they might have embraced the Interex philosophy. The Thousand Sons, obsessed with knowledge and wary of the Imperium's fear of sorcery, might have found kinship in a civilization that studied chaos rationally. Even the White Scars, with their disdain for heavy-handed tyranny, might have seen the Interex way as a purer form of humanity. And what of the shattered Mechanicum? Could fragments of Mars have been swayed by a civilization that mastered technology without dogma? In this alternate timeline, the heresy never unfolds. Or rather, it unfolds in reverse. Horus does not rebel against the Emperor in the name of chaos, but in the name of humanity. He raises a new banner, not draped in demonic blood, but in harmonic song, and instead of tearing the Imperium apart with war, he offers it a mirror, one that shows what it has become, and what it could be. But the Emperor perhaps would not yield. His vision was rigid, his truth was absolute. He did not tolerate rival ideologies, even peaceful ones. And so, war still comes, but it is not chaos versus Imperium. It is the dream of humanity versus its nightmare. Horus leads not a rebellion of traitors, but a revolution of ideals. And the Interex become the crucible of that vision. A sanctuary world, a new Terra. Could such a war be won? Perhaps not. The Imperium's might is nearly limitless. The loyalist legions are many, and the High Lords of Terra would never submit to anything that undermines their divine authority. But even in defeat, the Interex way might survive. It might inspire insurgencies, forge exiles into philosophers, and give voice to every soul who looks at the Imperium's grim shadow and dares to whisper, "There must be another way." In this alternate history, the Chaos Gods are weakened. Denied the great tragedy of Horus's fall, they lose their most potent weapon. The Horus heresy becomes a footnote, an event that never happens or happens differently, without the scale or symbolism that empowers the ruinous powers. Lorgar, without the catalyst of Horus's descent, might never spread the faith. Magnus, without betrayal, might find redemption. The Emperor, perhaps, is forced to confront his failures not through battle, but through argument, through philosophy, through the undeniable proof that his children are capable of more than conquest. Of course, it didn't happen that way. Horus fell, not to wisdom, but to pride. The Interex were destroyed, not embraced, and the galaxy burned for it. But the possibility remains like a ghost in the warp, a whispered what-if that haunts every ruin and every shrine. The Interex could have changed everything. Horus could have been the Lightbringer, not the betrayer. And we, this galaxy of unending war and silence, could have been so much more. The Imperium does not merely fight wars, it erases civilizations. This is not collateral damage, it is policy, tradition, belief. The fall of the Interex is often framed as a singular tragedy, a regrettable but exceptional event. But that is a lie told by a regime built on forgetfulness. The Interex were not the first to be wiped away in the name of unity, and they were certainly not the last. Their destruction is part of a pattern, a rhythm of genocide that has defined the Imperium since its inception. A pattern as relentless as the drums of war that accompany every crusade. During the Great Crusade alone, hundreds, perhaps thousands of human civilizations were encountered. Many were broken, yes, but some had endured. Some had rebuilt. Some had grown into cultures that no longer needed terra, no longer desired the Emperor's guiding hand. These were not threats in the traditional sense. They were political threats. Ideological threats. Examples that might inspire resistance, independence, or worst of all, alternative futures. And so, they were destroyed. Not because they attacked the Imperium, but because they were unacceptable. The Interex were just the most obvious, the most advanced. But what of the Diasporex, a human Xenos nomadic culture wiped out because it refused to abandon its alien companions? What of the Auric kingdoms of the Eastern Fringe, who practiced psychic harmony and were eradicated by the Ultramarines? What of the pre-imperial technocracies that worshipped neither chaos nor machine, but rational progress? All gone. Burned, shattered, silenced. This is not conquest, it is purification. The Imperium is not an empire in the classic sense. It does not tolerate variation, autonomy, or even peaceful divergence. It is not a unifier of mankind, it is a filter. Anything that does not match its rigid definition of humanity is treated as heresy. And heresy is death. There is no room for negotiation, no trial, no appeal. You conform or you are unmade. The myth of the Emperor's mercy during the Great Crusade is just that, a myth. In theory, compliance was peaceful. In practice, compliance meant surrendering your culture, your history, your beliefs, and often your people. Even compliant worlds were often stripped of their native leaders, their unique traditions suppressed or rewritten, their technology seized and corrected. Resistance, even ideological resistance, was grounds for annihilation. And if a world showed signs of power, true, independent power, it was not brought into the fold. It was put to the sword. Some within the Imperium understand this, even if they don't say it aloud. Some Astartes mourn what they were forced to destroy. Some Inquisitors, in the rare moments of self-reflection, question the purpose behind their purges. But the machine is too large, too loud, and too old. It cannot stop. It cannot listen. It cannot change. The very structure of the Imperium demands genocide as a function, not a flaw. And chaos, twisted and foul as it is, feeds on this cycle. Because every act of righteous slaughter, every civilization erased in the name of purity, deepens the wound in humanity's soul. It pushes more people into desperation, into madness, into rebellion. The Imperium, in its quest to protect humanity, often becomes the reason humanity falls. The Interex were not just a casualty, they were a symbol. Their destruction was a message to the galaxy, that there can be no second path, that there can be no divergence, that anything which contradicts the imperial truth, even by example, must be expunged. And so the galaxy becomes quieter with every passing century. Quieter not because there is peace, but because there are fewer voices left to speak. This is the hidden genocide, not of bodies alone, but of futures. The Imperium has slaughtered not only lives, but possibilities. Each civilization it destroyed carried a unique vision of what humanity could be. Each was a fragment of a potential that will never be realized. And now, with only the grim echo of war remaining, we are left with the worst possibility of all, that we have become the very monsters we once feared. The Interex were not spared because they were too dangerous. They were destroyed because they were too right. And in their silence, we hear the question the Imperium cannot answer. What if we were wrong all along? Chaos thrives where understanding ends. In most of the galaxy, the response to chaos is fear. Irrational, superstitious, absolute. The Imperium wages holy war against it. The chaos gods themselves revel in the extremes: rage, lust, stagnation, deceit. And yet, the Interex did something neither the Imperium nor chaos expected. They neither worshipped nor feared. They understood. The Interex's rejection of chaos was not reactionary, it was measured, philosophical. They viewed chaos not as gods or demons, but as metaphysical consequences, expressions of unchecked emotion, spiritual entropy, and cognitive decay. Where the Imperium burned witches and sealed libraries, the Interex studied, categorized, and warned. Their hall of devices was not a vault of temptation, it was a gallery of threat recognition. They had learned that knowledge of chaos was not inherently corrupting, so long as that knowledge was paired with self-discipline, education, and cultural immunization. This idea, that chaos can be understood without being embraced, is almost heretical in its nuance. The Imperium cannot tolerate such a position because it requires trust in the rationality of the individual, and the Imperium trusts nothing except doctrine. Chaos, for its part, loathes such nuance. It feeds on extremity. The Interex, in maintaining a balance, denied both powers their strength. They proved that ignorance was not the only defense. That understanding could be a shield. That control could exist without oppression. And perhaps most damning of all, they showed that humans could coexist with non-humans without inviting demonic corruption. This stands in stark contrast to the Imperium's philosophy, which is built on containment and suppression. The ecclesiarchy claims chaos is a divine blasphemy. The Inquisition treats it as a virulent infection. The Adeptus Mechanicus, when it dares speak of it, considers it a failure state of forbidden logic. None of these perspectives seek to understand chaos as a natural phenomenon, only as an enemy to be erased. And so, chaos becomes more powerful through ignorance, because fear, repression, and silence are its greatest weapons. But the Interex took another road. They mapped chaos. They built systems, linguistic structures, philosophical models. It is likely that they taught their children about the warp, not through myth or fear, but through scientific and ethical education. Chaos wasn't the devil in the shadows. It was a storm. Dangerous, yes, but navigable, predictable. To be avoided through wisdom, not flame. This was not recklessness. This was courage. Their rejection of the imperial truth was also telling. The Interex did not believe in gods, not the emperor, not chaos, not the alien pantheons. They believed in law, harmony, and restraint. They saw the universe as a complex machine of natural and spiritual forces, none of which required devotion, only comprehension. This worldview gave them the tools to combat chaos without submitting to fanaticism. And that, in the end, may be why the Imperium could not accept them. They had what the Imperium claimed to offer, without the cruelty, without the sacrifice, without the god. Philosophically, the Interex represented a third way, not the raw, liberating madness of chaos. Not the soul-crushing rigidity of the Imperium, but coexistence, control, and contemplation. A society that knew it could never eliminate chaos entirely, but could guard against it, not with fear, but with culture. That kind of thinking is dangerous to both sides. It robs chaos of its allure. It exposes the Imperium's hypocrisy. Imagine, if you will, a galaxy where such thinking was allowed to flourish, where chaos cults were defeated not with flame, but with education, where warp travel was guided by scholars instead of prayers, where psychers were trained by rational minds instead of bound by chains or burned at the stake. That galaxy might still be filled with war, yes, but it would be a war of ideas, not just bodies. And chaos fears ideas, because ideas are harder to kill than people. In this light, the Interex weren't just an alternative. They were a challenge, a living accusation. They proved that the Imperium had a choice, once, that it still might. And chaos too saw them for what they were, a dam against the flood, not built from stone or fire, but from reason. And so both forces converged. The Imperium erased them to protect its narrative. Chaos corrupted the moment to sow despair. The Interex stood between them for one brief moment and held the line. They lost. But in their loss, they offered us a glimpse of something we never see in the grimdark future, a galaxy where understanding is not weakness and balance is not impossible. The Imperium is not just an empire of war, it is an empire of forgetting. It buries its failures, silences its shame, and rewrites its defeats. The Interex, once destroyed, were not recorded as enemies or rivals. They were erased, omitted, made to vanish as though they had never existed. In the wake of their annihilation, the Imperium did not speak their name. No records remain in the official archives of the Administratum. No sermons warn of their philosophy. No campaigns were launched in their memory. It is as if they were a dream, fragile, beautiful, and utterly forgotten. But this silence is not ignorance. It is intent. The Imperium has long understood the power of memory. It preserves what reinforces its dogma and purges what challenges it. History within the Imperium is not a discipline. It is a weapon. The truth of the Interex was too dangerous to be allowed, not because they were traitors, not because they were heretics, but because they were right, because they had succeeded where the Imperium had failed. And so, their memory was classified, then discarded. This act of erasure speaks volumes. When the Imperium conquers other civilizations, especially those it deems fallen or corrupted, it often records the event in detail. Entire libraries are filled with stories of victory over orcs, Eldar, and even rebellious human worlds. Their names are kept as warnings, as trophies. But the Interex? No battle honors, no commemorative litanies, no mentions in the Codex Astartes, not even in the forbidden margins of forbidden tomes. That absence is deliberate. Why? Because the Interex represent a counter-narrative to the very heart of the Imperium's identity. They were human, they were moral, they were strong, and they rejected both chaos and the Emperor. That trifecta cannot be allowed to exist within Imperial memory. If the average citizen, or even the average Astartes, knew that an alternative path had once been real, not theoretical, not speculative, but achieved, how could the brutal sacrifices demanded by the ecclesiarchy be justified? How could the endless war, the soul-crushing bureaucracy, the ritualized ignorance be maintained? The silence around the Interex is not just historical, it is psychological. A collective amnesia imposed from above, a lobotomy applied to a species. And it worked. Ask 100 Imperial scholars about the Interex and you'll receive only blank stares or fearful evasions. Ask the Inquisition and you might be silenced yourself. Their existence lingers only in whispers, in forbidden texts, in the vague unease of veterans who saw too much during the Crusade. They have become myth, rumor, ghost. The greatest proof that the Imperium fears truth more than it fears any enemy. There is a tragedy here deeper than genocide. Cultural erasure is not just about loss, it is about theft. The Interex were not simply killed. Their wisdom was stolen from the galaxy. The future they might have inspired was amputated. The questions they raised were never allowed to echo. And now, all we have are fragments, stories told in hidden rooms, tales passed in code between dissidents, faint references in pre-heresy logs that survived by accident. But even these fragments burn. They reveal the wound beneath the armor. The Interex should have been remembered as brothers, as kin, as a lost branch of the human tree that flourished, not withered. Their death should have been mourned, debated, studied, but the Imperium does not mourn. It buries. And the deeper it buries, the more we must ask, what else has been lost? What other truths lie beneath the layers of sanctioned ignorance? In the end, the Interex are not just a historical footnote. They are a mirror, shattered and buried, yes, but still capable of reflecting the Imperium's deepest fear, that all of this empire of pain and fire and silence, was never inevitable. That it was a choice, and that choice was wrong. If the galaxy still holds echoes of the Interex, they exist not in monuments or memory, but in fragments, philosophies buried beneath dogma, technologies mislabeled as heretical, and cultures that unknowingly walk the path the Interex once paved. Though the Imperium tried to silence them utterly, something of their spirit may yet endure. Not as survivors, but as shadows that linger in places the Imperium cannot fully control. One could look to the Eldar and see, ironically, something of the Interex's restraint, their careful use of psychic power, their obsession with beauty and control, their fear of chaos not as superstition, but as cosmic consequence. But the Eldar are a dying race, arrogant and insular. The Interex were human. Their philosophy was not born from decline, but from choice. Still, the echo remains. A glimmer in how the Eldar wield discipline like a weapon against madness. More poignantly, some have speculated that fragments of the Interex legacy may survive in the most unexpected corners of humanity. The rogue traders, for example, those few who move beyond the Imperium's rigid borders, often return with tales of human cultures untouched by Imperial rule. Some are barbaric, others are strangely ordered, civilized, enlightened. Could these be offshoots of Interex colonies? Refugees that fled the destruction of their homeworld? It is impossible to know. The Imperium does not investigate such rumors, it exterminates them. Even within the Imperium itself, there are cracks in the wall where Interex-like ideas seep through. The scholars of the Ordo Xenos, when not shackled by paranoia, occasionally recognize that not all Xenos are equally dangerous. Some even advocate for containment, study, or controlled interaction, principles the Interex mastered millennia ago. These voices are often silenced, branded as radicals, but they persist, quietly. And they carry the same warning the Interex once sang, that understanding is not surrender, that control is not always achieved through domination. The navigators, too, with their ancient knowledge of the warp, may unconsciously echo Interex insights. The Interex had learned to understand chaos without worshipping it. So too do the navigators thread the Imperium with a balance of fear and mastery. Their houses are filled with secrets, and it is not impossible to imagine that somewhere in their deepest vaults lies knowledge that once passed through Interex hands. Among the Astartes, there are whispers, not loud, not common, but persistent. Some veterans of the heresy, those few who survived from the early days of the Crusade, remember the Interex. And though their lips are sealed by centuries of conditioning, sometimes in the silence of a long watch or the edge of a dream, they remember a people who met them with music, not fire. Some even carry relics, symbols taken not as trophies, but as regrets. A carved crystal, a half-burned melody etched into armor, a memory of what was lost, worn like a scar. In the Adeptus Mechanicus, forbidden archives may still contain fragments of Interex tech, devices too elegant, too integrated, to be understood by Martian priests who seek only replication, not comprehension. These are labeled anomalous, dangerous, or simply incomprehensible. But the data persists. Perhaps one day, a radical magos will look deeper. Perhaps they already have, and simply keep silent. And then there are the rebels, the heretics not to chaos, but to the Imperium, the ones who flee not to demons, but to freedom. Among them, some carry dreams of a better humanity. Not a post-imperial utopia, but something grounded in logic, beauty, and restraint. They speak of peace not as surrender, but as strength. And they act, unknowingly or not, as spiritual descendants of the Interex. Their flames flicker, most are crushed. But the dream persists. Because dreams are hard to kill. The Imperium can burn worlds, silence records, and murder philosophies, but it cannot stop ideas from returning, from taking root again in new soil. The Interex were destroyed, yes, but the echo of their way, their art, their reason, their harmony, may yet live on in those who resist despair. And maybe that's what truly frightens the Imperium. Not chaos, not aliens, but the idea that something better than itself might rise again from the ashes it thought it had buried forever. The Interex were not perfect, but they were better. And even now, millennia later, in the darkest corners of the galaxy, their memory still sings. Humanity, in its long march across the stars, has always needed a mirror, a reflection to show what it is becoming, and what it could be. The Interex were that mirror, and when the Imperium looked into it, it saw not a rival, not a heretic, not a Xenos-tainted outpost. It saw itself, perfected. And that was unbearable. The Interex were not idealists. They were not pacifists. They were pragmatic moralists in a galaxy built to devour such things. They believed that civilization, true civilization, was not measured by how many enemies you could kill, but by how many you could live beside without surrendering yourself. They made alliances without subjugation. They studied chaos without falling to it. They protected their people not with fear, but with understanding. And in that rarest of achievements, they became something the Imperium could never be. Free. Freedom is a dangerous thing in the 41st millennium, because it implies choice, and the Imperium is a system designed to eliminate choice. You serve or you die. You believe or you burn. But the Interex asked questions instead of giving orders. They built consensus instead of chains, and in their very existence, they proved that the grimdark galaxy was not a universal truth, but a carefully curated lie. The tragedy of the Interex is not that they were destroyed, it's that they were never given a chance. There was no debate, no council, no trial by fire, just a spark of misunderstanding, a whisper of betrayal, and then fire. And in that fire, a civilization died, a people died. But more than that, a future died. It's easy to hate the Imperium for what it did, but it's more honest to pity it. The Imperium is not merely cruel, it is afraid. Afraid of anything it does not control. Afraid of deviation. Afraid of mirrors. And in destroying the Interex, it destroyed a chance to be something more than a cage of steel and skulls. The lesson of the Interex is not just a historical footnote. It is a warning, a plea, that in every war of annihilation, something precious may be lost forever. That in every cry of heresy there might be truth. That in every enemy there might be a teacher. We live in a galaxy of silence. But the Interex sang. They sang until their voices were drowned in bolter fire and orbital flame. And though the Imperium silenced them, their echo remains, in those who still ask questions, in those who still dream of harmony, in those who dare to look into the mirror and not look away. We cannot bring them back, but we can remember them, not as victims, but as visionaries, as a reminder of what was lost, not by accident, but by design. And in that memory, maybe, we can begin to unmake the lie. If this story stirred something in you, if the Interex made you think, made you feel, made you question the certainty of what you thought you knew, then subscribe. Because these stories, these forbidden truths, deserve to be told. Not whispered, not buried, but sung.